Insurance companies used to have a different way of managing how to keep hold of their money. Back in the paper claim days, and I'm sure many of you have heard these stories, I remember clearly at the conference, when we had an ex-employee from Blue Cross came and spoke to us and talked about how they were under direction to take 25% roughly of all the paper claims they received and dump them. Well, they can't do that anymore because now everything is electronic. So just as everything else has evolved with technology, so has the process that the insurance companies have devised to make sure they aren't paying out more than they should. The way that they do that now is denials. So we're going to talk about how to get past that. It's critical because, as you all know, some of you are, especially your physicians, you're really feeling the fact that you don't have that margin anymore. So you can't afford to let things just fall through the cracks through a denial. So I want to talk about the climbing cost of denials in your practice. And these statistics, I would say, are not extreme at all. They're probably a little understated. The average medical practice is failing to collect 25% of the money that's owed to the practice. That means that $125 billion is left on the table with unpaid claims. So if you're wondering where those CEOs get those major bonuses and their Learjets from the insurance companies, this is it. You're giving it to them. So we want to find a way to not let that happen. We want you to have the Learjets and the big bonuses. 70% of the claims are paid the first time. That means 30% of claims submitted are either lost, ignored, or denied and returned. That's huge. Of those claims, of that 30% that fall into that category, 60% have never been resubmitted to the payers. So just off the top, medical practices on an average don't collect 18% of their claims. That's a lot of work that you've gone to. Now, to put those statistics in a real-life picture, and I think this is probably hard to read, but you have it in your handout, I'm going to give you an example of a practice I audited, an ENT practice, two-physician practice, not local, in Southern California. And I picked an example that was not extreme. This isn't a group that was really, really doing poorly. I have much more extreme examples I could have shown you, but I want to give you a realistic calculation. So I went in and we looked at the number of claims they averaged per year. We looked at the average percentage of denials that they had, which was very high. It was 23% on their first pass. We extrapolated the number of denials. And as a national average, reworking a denial, the expense for that to the practice is $20 a claim. That's national. I would venture to guess in Northern California it's going to be higher than that. But just to be conservative, this practice lost just under $50,000 by the process of reworking denials. Now that's just the expense they went to. And then if you back out and you look at the actual money that never got paid, the denials or appeals that were never paid or processed, that was another $222,000. So this practice lost $270,000 because of denials. This is not unusual. I frequently have gone into practices where denials, there are drawers full of denials because staff is being pulled, and I know I don't have to tell you, they're being pulled 100 directions. And to do a denial, you have to focus. You have to have a plan and you have to spend time. The other thing I've seen is people will just rebill when they don't get a payment, which is completely a waste of time and resources and should never happen. A claim should never be rebuilt unless you know why you're rebilling it. So I wish I had more physicians in the room so that I could let them know and to support you all and how much time you need and support and resources and education to do this effectively for them. So if you need me to speak to any of them, just call me. I'm happy to do it. Now I have in your handout, just underneath that form, there's a form that you can go back to your practices and do that same calculation. Most of that information should come very easily from your practice management software, or if you outsource your billing, you should be able to get it from that company. If for any reason you can't get that, it's not available, I've also listed examples of how you can pull that information manually so that it's pretty statistically significant for you. I really encourage everyone to do that. It will be an eye-opener, and it makes the next part of the talk make more sense, which is how do you avoid having to do so many denials. Denials come into two categories. The avoidable, the ones you can prevent up front, and then the 10% that are unavoidable. 90% of them are preventable. So we want to get to the point where you're only dealing with 10%, not the 23 that we just saw in the other office, and I've seen it much higher in those. So first we'll talk about avoidable denials. These are registration inaccuracies, people who are ineligible for their insurance when they come in, the diagnosis code is no longer valid, or the CPT code, the charges are bundled improperly, the right modifiers aren't on the claims, they're beyond the timeliness limit, usually because of one of the first 5 issues. The credentialing or provider enrollment isn't in place for that provider. Medical necessity, which actually falls in both categories, avoidable and unavoidable, or there's no authorization or referral. Now, how many are with a primary care practice? Okay, and how many are specialty? Okay. You definitely are going to see more of these. The registration issues, that's the biggest thing you can do in primary care. The others, all of these come into play, certainly. Now, the unavoidable denials, here we see medical necessity again. Medical necessity, often you can determine in advance by looking at Medicare's LCDs, the different payers' medical policies. But there are also a lot of medical necessities that you don't have any way to determine in advance. So you will see denials come in this way. You'll also see additional information requested. Now, this is another topic that I see a lot of in the offices that we work with. They will get these requests, not really know what to do with them, they're busy, they get put aside. This is usually very easy money. Send a document, you're paid. So that's an important one. Unless there are extenuating circumstances, the target you want to look for is less than, well, 7 to 10% should come back after the first claim submission. That should be maximum. Now, most of your practice software should be able to give you that number. It's called first pass paid, usually is the term that you will get. And you really want to look at that, because if it's higher than this, then you know you have an area you're going to need to focus on with the front office. So those are the problems. Now we'll talk about the solutions. The first one is real-time eligibility verification. There should not be an office in here that doesn't have this. It's impossible to work without it in this particular environment. You have people changing insurances frequently. You have high deductibles, particularly this time of year. Lots of patients have decided to reduce the money they pay for their premiums by getting a high deductible. However, when they come in with a high deductible, they don't want to have to pay the high deductible. So the only time you have real leverage is before the service. Because once that patient has left the office and you bill them for that high deductible, your chances of collecting have dropped about 50%. And it gets worse as time goes on. So the ability for the staff member, when he or she greets that patient, to say, oh, I see you're no longer eligible for your Blue Cross. What's your new health insurance information? Oh, yeah, that's right. Because I think you've all experienced, even if you ask a patient, do you have new insurance? No. So now you're going to know you need to get new insurance. So then you run that through your system. You say, oh, this patient has a $4,500 deductible, of which she's met none. And she's here today to have XYZ procedure that's going to be $2,000. So right at that moment, you would address that with your patient. But all of that should happen. Everything's clean, you've got the right information, you've collected what you can, before that patient steps behind the reception desk and goes to see the doctor. This is where you'll make the biggest difference. If any of you need help with ideas on eligibility verification companies, I'm happy to tell you about that later. So once you know you have the good information, then you have to have an entire another set of tools to help you know how to deal effectively with denials. You want something that's going to analyze the kinds of denials you're getting, how many denials you're getting, and give you actual data to work with so you can make informed decisions. This is going to be different in every practice, it's going to be different in every specialty. Once you get that sort of data, you're empowered to make the kind of decisions you need, identify where in the practice you can make improvements, The other source you want is to look at your practice, specialty, organization, or maybe MGMA, Medical Group Managers Association, and find out what the benchmarks are in collections for your specialty. What's the denial rate? What's the average AR? How many days in AR? You want to compare with that. Now, your practice may be substantially different in some way than the average specialty of that type, and you would take it into consideration. But there are some pretty clear guidelines that we certainly use in our business with each specialty to make sure everything is on target. So you want to research this. Now, the next step is to hire the right team. Gone are the days where, everyone may not want to hear this, but gone are the days when you can have one person running an office, or even two. You can't be the receptionist, handle the billing, do the denials, and do the job that needs to be done. You have to have very highly experienced people, preferably certified coders. You want to have people who have great knowledge in your specialty or subspecialty. They need to be up to date with CMS and all of the Medicaid and the state Medi-Cal regulations, the options for bonuses, the strategies to avoid penalties. They also need to be able to audit the physician's work. They need to know that what's being coded, what's being billed, is reflected in the documentation. Now, I know physicians are so tired of hearing about this. I'm looking at two in the back right now making faces. And they're tired of hearing this. But it's to protect you, and that's the goal in our business, is we want our clients protected. So you need someone who has the ability to do that. Now, there are different solutions to making that happen. If you're able to do it in-house, if you do in-house billing, that's great. You need a real commitment from the physician to support continuing education. If you're a small office and you don't have that many personnel, you can consider outsourcing it, outsourcing part of it. You could consider bringing in a consultant to train the staff, to identify those areas for you where they could be improved and help bring that forward. But unfortunately, it's more labor intensive than it used to be. However, if you think back on that earlier slide where I showed you that they could have had $270,000 more in the practice, they could have afforded another employee or a part-time consultant or someone to help them with that problem. And that was the recommendation. Now, once you've got your right team, you've got your tools, then you get down to the nitty-gritty. The first step is this a true denial? Is it valid? Now, if it's valid, can I appeal it or resubmit it, or can I pass it on to the patient? And it takes a knowledgeable biller to be able to know which of those categories is going to work. When it gets to that point of you have to create that formal appeal, you've got to think of yourself as an attorney. You're going to build your case. Now, you won't get paid like an attorney, but you want to build your case. You have to look at that specific payer's guidelines, why it was denied, think it through, write up your appeal just as you would, just like in the Philadelphia story, or Philadelphia beauty, like you're writing to a 6-year-old. You literally walk them through it. You start by saying, this is what I want it reconsidered for payment. Don't just say, I want it reconsidered. They'll go, okay, reconsidered it. You gotta say, reconsider for payment, and this is why. And the key in this, and I've written specifics down in your handouts that I won't go over, but the key as far as I'm concerned is you cannot use a template. You can use a template to begin the process, but you have to develop that case based on the payer's guidelines, and you reflect back to them their policy statements. Because if you put it in their words and you're quoting them and saying it's from their documentation, your success rate is going to be very high. But again, obviously this takes time and research. The two main denials that you're going to see once you've handled all the upfront, nothing's going in incorrectly, are timeliness and medical necessity. And I've given you guidelines that we actually use in our business to approach each of those types of denials. Of course, you want to automate as much as you can. I did say you can't use a template, but you could start with a template. You could develop a template to address, maybe just putting in the patient's demographics. Your software might handle that for you. What other tools are available to you? Currently, the clearinghouse, most of the clearinghouses offer some amazing tools. Really good analytics on denial reasons, on denial types, percentages of first pass payments. Some of your in-house practice management software might handle that for you. But in addition to that, because every practice is specific and unique, there are also tools you can create within your own office. And I'll give you a few examples. One of the strongest documents you can put together would be an Excel sheet that shows your major payers, what their time frames are, how long do you have to do first insurance submission, how long for your first appeal, how long for your second appeal. And on that worksheet, you also build in a link to the website, a link to their medical policies, and some insurances want their own form used. Now, they might accept something else, but if they want their own form, I would use their form. So having all those links in one spreadsheet, then it's not all falling on the one person in the office who remembers, oh yeah, the partnership health plan, we have to get it in 6 months, but we have this long to appeal. You want it there where anybody can reference that. Very strong. And it's going to be different for each practice. Then you want to have a policy on how you work those denials. You want to start with those that have the shortest timeline. So if you have a company who's going to only give you 30 days to respond or 90 days, you're going to deal with that one probably before you deal with Medicare, who's given you a year. The caveat being you want to start with the highest dollar amount. And I absolutely have seen where people will focus on this $35 outstanding secondary when they have a $15,000 primary claim that needs to be addressed. So a way to sort that, prioritize it. If you're supervising other staff, a way to check that, make sure that that's the direction it's going. Once you get to that point, you know what you're going to work, you have your tools, you want to choose the least labor-intensive approach you can that's appropriate for the situation. And again, a lot of this will come back to having that experienced biller. Some payers, under some circumstances, all they want you to do is correct the claim and send it back through. That's the easiest, simplest, least expensive. Other payers will automatically reject it because they say it's a duplicate. So you have to know. So the next is calling. Some payers will allow you to call. You can call and say, oh, this needs to be reprocessed with this information. They'll do that for you. Other payers won't. So developing, again, this into your grid of insurance companies is very helpful. You don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. You're choosing what's going to go through most efficiently, most quickly, and cost the least to practice. My next favorite approach is the fax. Again, some insurances will take that, some will not. But when you do the fax, you know they've received it. You have your receipt that it's gone through. That's important. And then the last would be if you're sending that claim out by mail with the appeal, that's what you're going to do. Now, in your handouts, I listed all the kinds of documentation you should attach. It's different from how it used to be. For example, using screenshots from your practice management software, reports out of your electronic billing. Those are key elements to include often. Don't send more information than they're asking for, especially if it's requesting medical information additional. Don't send more than they're asking. Don't give them 2 years worth of history. You're just giving them 2 years more to look at and analyze, but send what's pertinent. Now my last, and this is my superstar tip of the day for billers, if you have an appeal you're doing that's a fairly large amount, always copy and put on there that you copied the patient on that cover letter to the appeal. Don't send it the entire backup documentation to the patient, but get that patient on the letterhead. 2 things will happen. 1, the insurance company will know, the patient's aware. 2, you're involving the patient and letting them see you're working hard on their behalf. And it is amazing, and hopefully some of you have had this experience, the patient calls the insurance company, and all of a sudden something you've been working on for 8 months gets paid. Because the insurance companies, they're nice to us, they like us, we make friends with them when we call, but they don't really care if we get upset. They do care when they're policyholders who are paying premiums. So that's the one thing. Now, I don't recommend you do it on all your appeals. It'll be expensive, it'll be time consuming. But when you have those larger ones, the ones that are significant to your practice, I would definitely take that direction.